Kamal, we're going to have a conversation that would have seen us cancelled 5 to 10 years ago. We're going to talk about trans, toxic masculinity, pornography, boys and girls, and social media with two women who have been crusaders on all of these issues. Julie Bindel, who's been fighting the fight for lesbianism for decades, and Helen Joyce, the woman whose book Trans rather blew the lid off the whole trans extremist movement.
So, a special edition for today. Camilla and myself go to Oxford to join the Oxford Literary Festival. We hope you enjoyed.
Kamal, you're in the minority here, I'm afraid. You're surrounded by three fairly powerful women, I would say, people with big opinions. And we're going to talk about women and gender and transgenderism and toxic masculinity with two brilliant guests. Julie Bindel, the author of Lesbians, Where Are We Now?, which I've got in my hands, and
the wonderful Helen Joyce, the author of Trans, which I have in my hands here, Gender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. Welcome, Helen and Julie, to the Daily Tea. So good to have you here.
So first of all, I mean, we're saying on this book, to be fair, Julie, Lesbians, Where Are We Now? Can I ask you both, on the trans debate, where are we? Because a lot has changed in the last 10 years. I feel we've gone from a position where if you even questioned the idea that gender and sex are different and that a man claiming to be a woman can be a woman and vice versa, if you even questioned it, you are literally risking being completely cancelled and your career being over. Whereas I think we're in completely different territory now. And I'm openly saying on social media and on telly, you know, I think a man is a man and a woman is a woman. And so far I've managed to survive and I've still got a job, which is progress. Julie?
Things are moving in the right direction. It's definitely not over. But certainly there are more and more people, mainly women, but also increasing numbers of men that are speaking out. And some of them, the ones that are able to, are speaking out in the courtroom, at tribunals, at the Supreme Court even, and challenging what has become an orthodoxy and a truism and something that is completely and utterly bonkers. And so many people who hadn't been engaged in this debate before are now able to look at it because the era of no debate is definitely over. And they, of course, now increasingly are being exposed to the other side of the argument, which is no, it's not true. Trans women are not women. And nobody believes this. And this is an issue of women's rights, not bigotry, women's rights.
Julie, just tell us a little bit about the 3, 4, 5 decades you've been involved in campaigning around women's rights, how that changed and how suddenly you went from being portrayed as the progressive to the grotesque conservative.
Well, to be fair, I was never really portrayed as a progressive because feminists that campaign against male violence have never been that popular outside of feminist spheres and some human rights spheres, which of course then all went topsy-turvy with the trans issue. But I was recognised as someone, even if thought of as a complete pain and irritating, as doing some kind of good in terms of rape, domestic violence, child sexual abuse, prostitution and the like. And then, of course, I became a bigot, Nazi adjacent, akin to Hitler, which is always really quite irritating when you consider yourself a human rights defender. And so I, along with swathes of other women, feminists worldwide, across the globe, were saying, look, you know, we can't deny the fact that institutions favour men. Not every man has power over every woman, of course, but that institutionally we have a problem here with patriarchy. And this is something we need to dismantle because here are the results. Barely any convictions for rape, rape in marriage still being perfectly legal in many countries, etc. And then all of a sudden, oh, you're anti-queer, you're a homophobe, you're a racist, you're an anti-Semite, you're an all-round bigot. And of course, these slurs came, these defamatory slurs came, because what the trans activist did was put all of the bad things that are going to ring the bells of decent liberals in one basket. And so you become all of the bad things that anyone's ever heard of.
Helen Joyce, I've got your book Trans in my hands now. It's a Sunday Times bestseller. Some of the comments on the back include Sunday Times, thank goodness for Helen Joyce. Observer, scholarly, compassionate and courageous. Telegraph, a grown-up has entered the room. The Times, rigorous and brave. Financial Times, a passionate defence. Good Lord, the New Statesman, incisive, compassionate and nuanced. And this is because, as it says on the back, Helen Joyce offers an antidote to the chaos and cancelling. People weren't always that supportive of you though, were they, Helen?
Well, those were comments from when the book came out first. But at the same time, of course, there's another discourse, which is that, I, a mild-mannered, middle-aged woman who at the time was the finance editor of The Economist, really just decided I'd like to do a bit of Nazism for fun. Very bizarre, because all I ever said was there are two sexes and sex can't change, and that has some consequences. It particularly has consequences for women, children and gay people, but honestly for all of us, because we are animals, we're mammals. It's consequential to be male or female and it can't change. And if you work that forward, you see what the consequences are of pretending otherwise. I thought that the first time I said to somebody, hey, listen, if you say that men can be women, you're going to end up at some point with a rapist in women's jails, that they would go, oh, I didn't think of that. You're right. Let's think again. Instead, they said, you're saying trans women are all rapists. Those are two different propositions. But that's how it was. People would say anything rather than listen to a very simple statement of fact and just some very short, logical chains of reasoning from that. So I thought that was so weird that I decided I'd write a whole book about it, and that changed my life, because it turns out that once you say these things, you're not allowed to say anything else ever again. Nobody ever wants to know anything about anything, I think, now, except that I know that there are men can't be women and women can't be men.
Helen, can I ask you, a recent report by Alice Sullivan has said that despite the positive movement in the debate, as you say, Julie, we have become much more understanding of the ludicrous nature of some of the outcomes of the initial trans conversation. Alice Sullivan, though, says that still the NHS, the police, the civil service are collecting data around what they describe as gender rather than biological sex. Now, Helen, what are some of the dangers with what Alice Sullivan has identified?
So Alice is a social scientist and statistician. She works at University College London, and she's another of these mild-mannered, middle-aged women who turned out to be massive Nazis when it came to the question of sex and gender. And she has spent a couple of years looking at data collection, and she has this amazing chart in this report she's done that looks at all official statistics and charts questions about sex, questions about gender, and questions about gender identity, because often gender is just a synonym for sex. Mm-hmm. So if you go back 15, 20 years, it's all sex, and now a lot of it is gender identity. It's, do you identify as a man? Do you identify as a woman? Do you identify as something else? And so, I mean, you asked at the beginning about whether whether things are changing, and certainly they are, but there's a lot of institutional inertia. All of this stuff got baked in over, say, 10, 20 years in government departments, in regulators, and in big businesses' HR departments, and those things don't change quickly. It got put in, and now it's having to be ripped out like bindweed, bit at a time, everywhere. But they're just continuing, People run on their grooves in organisations. So all the things like the census, household survey, NHS data collection, those things have been rewritten, often at the level of a computer coding, to ask people what they identify as and not what they actually are. And in fact, there's been so much propaganda that I think if you ask a trans-identifying person, what sex are you, they'll answer with their gender identity. I think you'd probably have to say something like, no, I really mean what was written on your birth cert when you were born.
And what are the dangers? I'm interested in what we should be doing about this, because if we're collecting data around how people identify rather than data on biological sex, the NHS, schools, etc., that has some dangers within it, does it not?
Well, we don't know what your gender identity has to do with anything. Like, people change quite quickly. Nobody was identifying as non-binary 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. So we genuinely don't know why you might want to know that somebody is non-binary, or why you would want to know that a man is identifying as a woman. Maybe those things are correlated with something, but we do know that your sex is correlated with a lot of big things. Your sex has implications for all your healthcare, not just pregnancy and so on. Like, every index value for nearly every test in medicine differs for a man and a woman. If you are lacking in iron, anemic, the level is different for men and women in your blood test. And that'll be true all the way through, what your blood pressure should be and all of that sort of stuff. So your healthcare is not going to be done properly if we don't record what your sex is properly. In crime statistics, women commit really nearly none of the violent crimes and really, really nearly none of the sexual violent crimes. So the number of women in jail is about 4% at any point of the number of men who are in jail. And they are also for far less violent crimes. So if we start recording even a few violent men as women, suddenly we're doubling the number of women who've committed rape. We now have, women who've raped with their penises. Like, for goodness sake, we now have paedophilic women in jail. Well, they're actually men. Usually there's no women in jail for paedophilic offences. And if there are, it will have been that they were working with a man and they were for money, supplying children. We just break all our statistics, but we also treat the individuals wrongly as well. Like your sex is relevant in ways that we don't know your gender identity is.
But then isn't the tide turning? I'm not suggesting, by the way, that people campaigning on this issue should say, oh, well, I think we're beyond that now. It was a bit of a phase. We all lost our minds and now we've got them back. Trump's come in America. He's cancelled all DEI. He's made it an executive order to decree that men are men and women are women. There's no longer going to be, for instance, trans women competing in women's sport and all the rest of it. And even actually, I think the Gen Zs, I mean, speaking as a mum, I think my children aged 16, 14 and 11 look upon this period of having 21 genders and find it ridiculous. They find the whole thing now ridiculous. That's not just because they've been brought up by gender critical parents. They think it's a little bit like Greta Thunberg. It all went too far. Everyone's gone mad and lost their heads. And we're now back to a sort of period of, I don't know, We've regained our senses.
The problem is, as Helen said, this is now entwined within many of our institutions, and it's a nightmare to disentangle that. And something that Helen said is, it's a real bugbear of mine, actually, that she pointed out about how when you talk about why we shouldn't have men who identify as women in prisons, in hospital wards, in refuges, rape crisis centres, bathrooms, when people say, so you're saying that all trans women are sexual predators, why wasn't that said to me on a regular basis with such ferocity when, as a young feminist, we were setting up women-only services without saying all men are potential rapists, all men are going to rape, all men are sexual predators? We were allowed to get on with that because even sexist men and women who supported that sexism acknowledged that enough of a minority of men were a danger to women, a bother to women as sexual harassers, a potential danger to girls, to children. Honestly, even the most rabid men's rights activists of the time didn't challenge why we needed single-sex spaces because of the potential of male violence. All of a sudden, these so-called pro-feminist men are saying that we must be arguing that all of these men that identify as women are sexual predators. Why didn't they challenge us before on this, before trans activism?
Very good point. Can we talk about boys and girls, if we can call them that, teenagers? Because I think there's been an interesting dialogue, particularly in recent weeks, on a couple of two different strains, really. We've had this whole debate about toxic masculinity and adolescence, and now adolescence is going to be shown in schools. And Keir Starmer's watched it, and it's suddenly become this phenomena on Netflix and beyond. We've also had, so that's kind of like, that's the toxic masculinity and sort of boyhood space. Reports on boys being left behind in school, girls overtaking them. And then I've noticed a trend, which I find quite worrying as a mother, of girls of the Gen Z generation rejecting motherhood, thinking there's something quite disgusting about having children, leading quite narcissistic, singular lives. Like, Helen, where do you think we are with the youth of today on some of these issues?
Oh, the youth of today.
Appalling
I
bunch.
see all of this as part of the same phenomenon of a rejection of reality and an unwillingness to talk about things as they are and not as you wish that they would be. I mean, human beings are mammals. We come in two sexes. The sexes are different in lots of ways and same in lots of ways. Those things are consequential. Sometimes they're minor, sometimes they're major. And if you can be clear-eyed and talk about these things, you can see that the trajectory of a female person's life is different from the trajectory of a male person's life. That's not to say one is better than the other, but it's as if every difference has to be recategorized as a hierarchy. Like that if I'm saying women aren't the same as men, I'm saying women are worse than men. So we're not able to just look and say, well, you know, boys and girls, very similar in lots of ways, different in some. Let's make sure that we have schooling that's good for both types of human beings, and within those both types of human beings there's a lot of variation too. I'm not saying all boys are the same or all girls are the same, and that more than one thing can be true at the same time. We can be being bad to girls and bad to boys, and I'm afraid we're doing both of those things. Like, girls know that the boys are looking at porn. Girls know that they're meant to be, you know, you see so many teenage girls now who've had their lips done, you know, the skirts are right up to their knickers. You just think this is not healthy for them. But also what's being done for the boys isn't healthy. Like this toxic masculinity thing, there is a toxic masculinity, but just being masculine isn't toxic. And there's also a toxic femininity, you know, leaning into these stereotypes, putting yourself into the box. Either of the boxes is bad for people. If we could just say, you know, we are a type of bounded, living being, a creature that has a life cycle, that has, you know, innate characteristics as well as able to learn. And how are we going to all thrive? How are we going to make a world that's fit for teenagers to thrive? Because I think we're not making a world that teenagers are thriving in at all now, in a load of ways.
How much do you think, Helen, social media is to blame for these developments that you're describing?
I mean, a fair amount, because one of the things that social media did is it created spaces that teenagers can be that there are no adults. And that's never been seen in the history of humanity. We've never tried to allow teenagers to bring each other up, so to speak, without mixed age groups, so that they're, you know, boys are learning from men, girls are learning from women. Ideally, they're both learning from each other too, but, you know, in traditional societies, they don't. Instead, we have places like Tumblr and TikTok, which are almost exclusively populated by young people with no adults. And young people are very labile. You know, they're very imaginative and creative and changing very fast and building their identities and changing their identities very fast. So they go into these weird cycles where they go off into the stratosphere, changing super fast, you know, creating new gender identities, spreading eating disorders, deciding that, you know, all girls hate all boys and that what you need is to look at Andrew Tate or whatever. And I think it's because they haven't got the containing and dampening effect of adults being around them in these spaces. So that's my problem with social media, is that it allows children to go crazy together with no adult seeing.
Julie, what's your view on the adolescence effect?
We've been trying, as feminists, to have a conversation with governments and others about pornography and the terrible effect on children, on boys growing up with pornography as sex education. We've been trying to talk about the pornography industry and how it operates like the Wild West. This is old. I remember talking about VHS videos and the problem of VHS videos, because, of course, those that are consuming pornography that give terribly misogynistic messages to men and, of course, to girls were being brought out of the cinema, where you had to be an adult to go in to watch pornographic films, and you could watch it at home. Now, of course, we have smartphones, we have social media, so the issue, you know, is way worse in terms of access. But why do we have to wait until Andrew Tate and this drama on Netflix, which the acting was great, I think the content is very weak compared to how it's been lauded, to get to the government about this? And I know the power of drama. As a lesbian, I, you know, was very, very pleased, thrilled when a lesbian storyline was first in a soap opera.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. So I'm not knocking drama as a medium for education and for opening people's minds, but I think we've been talking about this for decades. Look at the problem we have identified, and also look at the fact that sex education is so poor and almost non-existent across the country and elsewhere, that pornography has become a substitute for it, and a terrible one.
Can I ask a supplementary question on that? And Kamal, you sometimes mock me because I've become strangely fascinated by Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips, who are these two OnlyFans stars who have gained fame and notoriety and many, many millions by completing what can only be described as pornographic challenges to sleep with as many men as they can in a certain time frame. We've had these two ladies turning up at university dormitories to try and take young boys' virginity. We've had one of them turning up, I believe, at a care home to sleep with older men. And we've seen videos of men queuing up in masks to take part. And I just wondered what your view was, both of you, on that.
I really want to look at the men that are queuing to have sex with a woman who clearly is going to be deeply damaged even further than she no doubt already is. And forgive me for pathologising a young woman who is very clearly damaged. I can't describe it any other way. I want to look at the men, and I want to ask questions of the men, and I want to ask questions of some of the big hitters on X who have come after feminists, myself included, shouting about how these women only have themselves to blame and they are the ones manipulating the men, and how dare we suggest these women are in any way abused or manipulated. Look, let's face it, women have agency. Women are not held in shackles. Women do have choices, but those choices are massively constrained by the misogynistic context in which they live and operate. And I think that trans activism has both reflected and exacerbated the misogynistic context in which we live and in which those women operate.
I dislike absolutely everybody in those rooms. I mean, if we talk about toxic masculinity, like, I think you had 2 minutes with her. Like, why is a man turning up and queuing and putting on a condom to shag for, like, I don't know, 90 seconds and then be taken out and all of this? But also, why is she doing it? That's toxic femininity, one variety of toxic femininity, thinking that, you know, your body is nothing more than to be used this way, and that 1,000 men is better than 100 men, that you've got some value that's come out of this, that you can divorce any sort of feeling or self-respect from the money that you're making, that you are just the shell, the thing that's the image, you know. All of it is so profoundly anti-human and so profoundly anti any sort of ethical concern for yourself or for anybody else. I mean, am I saying it should be criminalised? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that this is ethically so subpar, I don't know where to put it on a scale. And I wish that we weren't giving it any oxygen. Like, that's the problem, isn't it?
I
That
agree.
somebody who acted like this, either the men or the women in that room, until the very recent past, there just would have been no way to make money out of this. No oxygen for them. I mean, she's clearly a woman who would rather any attention, like a toddler, any attention than no attention. And the men, I guess, I don't know. I mean, men seem to have a high tolerance for just random weird sex acts, frankly, compared with women. I mean, this cannot be pleasurable. This is not a pleasurable setup. But it's weird, and men seem to get tickled by weird. Sorry, Kamal.
Some men.
Not
I hope
all,
I don't have some
hashtag
men.
not
And also,
all
just
men.
Camilla, just to be super clear, I don't mock you for it. I just say that I just mean it's.
No, I don't mean. I have been strangely fascinated by it as a woman, as a mother. I've been conflicted over it. Well, these women are making money. They're kind of like, are they just owning it? Then I'm thinking, no. You've been interested in my intense interest in those stories.
Yeah,
Don't give them any attention,
No,
please.
I know.
I've been quite surprised. Yeah, it's been very, very interesting. Julie, just as we come to the end of this fantastic conversation, you've been through sort of various waves, maybe a roller coaster of different campaigns, and maybe sometimes you felt more optimistic, sometimes you felt more pessimistic. Just to leave us, I don't know whether it is an optimistic or a pessimistic place you feel yourself in now, given your decades of remarkable campaigning. Just give us an essence of the book and what you would like people who read the book, buy the book and read the book to take from it.
I see the oppression of lesbians as completely indivisible from the oppression of all women. And often lesbians are in the coalface. We're often the canary in the coal mine, if you like. So what happens to lesbians is an indication of what is going to happen to women in terms of the backlash, the misogyny, the lack of sexual freedom. But what I want is for lesbians who are now in their 20s or even younger to be able to enjoy the freedom that we carved out for ourselves in the early days before my time, when I came to the lesbian and feminist movement. You know, I was in my teens still, but it was the very late 1970s, and I want that same freedom and that same optimism for the future to be experienced and felt by young lesbians and young women everywhere. And I do feel very optimistic about the future because I'm a feminist that campaigns against male violence. I have to be optimistic. I don't see boys being born as bad or programmed to somehow hurt or abuse or oppress girls and women in their later life. This is completely and utterly not a natural state of affairs. And so I do feel very optimistic, and it's just as well
And Helen, a final thought maybe on motherhood, the future of motherhood, because this is a campaign that's been fought by lesbians, but also by mums. And it's actually given mums a voice, and a very substantial voice, after a period of actually being quite below radar, taken for granted, pushed aside.
Yes, indeed. A great deal of the fight back against trans rights activism was on Mumsnet. I would just say how important it is what Julie said about how lesbians indicate the status of women generally, because lesbianism is the only sexuality that has nothing to do with men. And there's lots of men who can't stand there to be anything that isn't to do with men. And so, when lesbians are being silenced, what you're seeing is men intruding even more. I'm sorry, I'm not anti-men here. This is just
Even I'm not.
Yeah, even you.
I'm definitely not. I love men. I love men.
I love men as well.
I'm all for men.
I mean, I'm a heterosexual woman married to a man with 2 sons. I've nothing against men. It's just that is what lesbian hatred is. It's hatred of something that is just for women. The motherhood thing, again, I'm like a broken record on this, that we are animals. And the most animal thing any human being does is grow another human being inside them, and it's something that only women can do. And that on itself really pisses off some men. But, if you want to pretend that you're not an animal, that you're not a mammal, that you're not a living, breathing creature that was conceived, born and will die, motherhood is very inimical to you. You've got to be into surrogacy, where you pretend that, the baby was born in a sack somewhere that you're not even going to name as a human being. I see all of this as part of the same thing, a part of a reality denialism, a denialism of our animal nature, and a pretense that in some future state we will be ghosts in machines, immortal, no suffering, maybe we just switch off when we die, I don't know what, maybe we never die. This is the one and only life we have, and we are very, very far from being able to live any other way. So I don't think we can put motherhood or the 2 sexes or any of those things, or healthy sexuality back into their proper place until we stop pretending that we aren't humans, that we aren't animals. And that's what we're doing right now.
Helen Joyce, Julie Bindel, Kamal Ahmed is the only man on this panel. Thank you.
Our diversity hire.
I know, well, indeed. Well, they say that. But a man who loves women, let's be honest. Like, I'm a woman who loves man, loving each other here on the Daily Tea. Thank you very much indeed. It is a remarkable sea change that we are having such open debates about this. I think it's easy to forget how difficult it was to have these conversations back in the day. Agree with them, disagree with them. Can we just make the arguments, have the counter narratives, just think this stuff through, rather than what we have seen in the past was just this attitude, as both of the women sort of made clear. We were free-thinking liberal women who were branded Nazis. I mean, I do identify with that. No, if you don't agree with me, then you're a Nazi. I mean, I really do hope that those dark days are over.
I certainly learnt a huge amount. And what better way than in a podcast to have those kind of conversations? They don't work on social media, as you have found to your cost, as Julie Bindel has found, as Helen Joyce has found. So we hoped you really enjoyed that chat we had with Helen and Julie. And just a reminder, the Oxford Literary Festival, which The Telegraph is delighted to be the media partner with, closes on Sunday, but there are still tickets available to hear from the likes of Richard Coles, Simon Armitage, Graham Brady and Harriet Walter. And Telegraph readers can even save 20% on tickets by entering the promo code 25TEL20. That's 25 and then capital TEL and then 20 at the checkout. And to book, visit oxfordliteraryfestival.org.
Also, I would like to hear your feedback to some of those discussions, particularly the whole Bonnie Blue, Lily Phillips and pornography debate that, as I keep on saying, I am fascinated by. You know the email address, but just to remind you, it's thedailytea@telegraph.co.uk, and you can contact us via our socials, X, Instagram and TikTok @Daily Tea Podcast. But we'll be back on Monday, 5 p.m.